Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Ari Pratama Ansori and my partner Hana Versta Sarojam Pujapasa are going to explain our material about language representation and the brain. The first material will be explained by myself. The main part of the brain that is responsible for all kinds of fundamental aspects of cognition, motor movement, and sensation is cerebrum or neocortex. Cerebrum or neocortex is a thin layer of tissue that forms the outermost surface of the brain. You can see in the picture that I've provided in the slide, cerebrum or neocortex is marked by blue color. The next material is four lobes of cerebrum. The cerebrum is divided into four lobes, and each of these lobes in turn has regions that are known to be important for particular function. The most important lobes for language are the temporal lobe, which is the green one, and the frontal lobe, which is the red one. Next is two important areas for language. There are two areas in particular that appear to be especially important for language. An area toward the front of the brain in the frontal lobe that includes Broca's area, and an area more or less beneath and behind the ear toward the back of the temporal lobe called Wernicke's area. You can see the specific location of Broca's and Wernicke's area in the picture that I provide in the slide. Next is problem that happen in the brain that affecting language. One of an example of brain damage that can interrupt how people see language is aphasia, a language disorder caused by brain damage. There are many kinds of aphasia, including Broca's aphasia, which is caused by damage to Broca's area. Broca's aphasia is characterized by difficulty with language production, with a thoughtful, slow speech, and a striking absence of function words like preposition, determiners, conjunction, and grammatical inflection. And next is Wernicke's aphasia, which is caused by damage to Wernicke's area. Wernicke's aphasia is in many ways the opposite of Broca's aphasia. Patients with this aphasia speak fluently and have no trouble with function words. However, the content of the speech is often not meaningful and may even contain word like string of word. Word like string of sound that are not actually a word. And the researcher called this aphasia as neologism. But Broca's and Wernicke's aphasia are not the only types of aphasia. In fact, there are several other including resulting deficit from damage to connection between Broca's and Wernicke's area, or conduction aphasia, as well as damage to connection to association area from this area, or you can call it transcortical aphasia. And another example of brain disorder is semantic dementia. According to Snowden, Goling, and Neary, semantic dementia is a progressive decrease in functioning semantic knowledge. This manifests initially as having difficulty in dealing with meaning of words, both in production and comprehension context. For more related studies about brain disorder, you can find a lot of them in this chapter in our book. And maybe that's all the material that I can explain. The next material will be explained by Hannah. Thank you.
So next is multiple languages. In this section I will talk about how two or more languages work. However, I will mainly focus on bilingual or bilingualism. So as we know, bilingualism is the norm worldwide, with at least 50% of the world's population speaking two or more languages. Some even estimate to go as high as 70%. So it only makes sense to see how bilingualism is represented. So what does it mean to be a bilingual? There are many definitions of what bilingual or bilingual means. Some say bilingual means a native speaker of two languages. Some also say it means to be fluent in two languages. So you should speak two languages fluently. But there is also a definition that says A bilingual means you are able to communicate in two languages. So it means you don't have to be necessarily fluent in two languages as long as you can communicate with it to make the other person understand you. It should mean that you are a bilingual. It is very important to keep in mind that there are different types of bilingualism. For example, native bilingualism. It means a person who began learning more than one language from a very early age. Native bilingualism is divided into two types, which are simultaneous bilingualism and sequential bilingualism. Simultaneous bilingualism means um, someone who learns a second language without first having mastered a first language. So it means this person learns two languages from a very early age at the same time, simultaneously. Meanwhile, sequential bilingualism means someone who learns a second language after achieving a mastery of the first language. So it means by the time they are learning the second language, they already have mastered the first one. Next is issues about bilingualism. So it is extremely rare that a bilingual speaker would have equal strength in all areas of all of their languages at the same time. For example, even if a bilingual speaker uses both languages equally on a daily basis, which is itself somewhat uncommon in real life, they are likely to have certain topics or uses of language that are language specific. Language specific means a word is distinctive to one specific language. So it means it's hard to find equal meaning or equal translation of this word in another language. So it means relative vocabulary strength can differ between languages quite easily. Next is balanced language environment. So many bilinguals speak environment. One language will be used relatively more than the other, and in this case, the less used language may be at a disadvantage. For example, an English learner might use English in the class, but once the class is finished and they go home, they will speak Indonesian more because their family, their friends, the people around them mainly speak Indonesian. The last is political or social issues. So, someone might not be able to speak more than one language because political or social reasons. Because of this, they use one language as little as possible or have a poor attitude toward it. These two can influence proficiency in the language because while the less you use a language, the worse your proficiency at it. For example, you want to talk about politics, but you feel like it is easier to speak about politics in Indonesian rather than in English, so you speak about politics in Indonesian, which means your vocabulary in politics is richer in Indonesian than in English. The bilingual brain. So in this section I will talk about how the brain processes bilingualism. So there is a great deal of work that has studied about the bilingual language processing in the brain. In terms of where multiple languages are presented in the brain, there are several studies using fMRI or PET, which are the scanning process or scanning technique to see the brain activity that multiple languages activate largely overlapping regions. However, these studies generally report averages across participants rather than patterns within individuals. Evidence from bilingual aphasia patients who have lost their language due to an accident clearly shows that the relationship between languages at the neurological level is much more complicated than largely overlapping, and it highlights the fact that there is a lot of individual variation in language representation. So there was this fMRI study that looked at healthy bilinguals and compared them at an individual level to examine which brain areas showed increased activity for the first versus second language. So in this study, they played short passages to a group of French to English bilinguals that were either in French or English, as well as a control condition where there was a short passage in Japanese that was played backward. This control condition is done to subtract away activation that was due only to hearing language-like sounds. So, from this study, they found a great deal of individual variation between speakers in exactly which areas of the brain become more active during listening, even in the first language, which is French. However, for the French passage, all participants did show activation in certain regions in the brain. Another study showed that proficiency may be more important than age of acquisition in determining how multiple languages are represented in the brain. So, the researchers found no difference in patterns of activation between the first and the second language of participants when those participants were equally proficient but had begun acquiring the second language early or late. However, speakers who had begun acquiring their second language at the same time but had achieved different levels of proficiency did show differences in the patterns of activation. So the conclusion to be drawn in this section is there is individual variation in precisely which parts of the brain becomes active during the same language stimuli. So it means the activation is not the same from one to another. And second language are not necessarily represented in the same areas as first languages, but they appear to become increasingly overlapping with first languages as people become more proficient. So it means when you first begin to learn your second language, it is not represented in the same areas as your first language, but as you become more and more fluent in your second language, it will be more overlapping with your first language in your brain. So that's all our presentation for today. Thank you for your attention and forgive our mistakes. If you have questions or suggestions or just any comments, please feel free to voice it out. Thank you.